Hello, and welcome to Workplace Stories, the podcast where human capital experts share their real-world experiences and insights. Hosted by Red Thread Research, Workplace Stories surfaces the latest industry trends, innovative talent strategies, and best practices for success. Tune in for practical advice on how to best transform your workplace.
Welcome to Workplace Stories. My name is Danny Johnson.
And I'm Stacia Garr.
And today we have the opportunity to talk to Ron Storn, who is the CHRO of Truckstop. We've known Ron for years. He was at Summit last year with us, and we had the opportunity to sit down and talk to him about culture, all things culture. Stacia, what stood out to you?
There were really two big things. One was an aha, which was we were talking about how does culture form? And he was saying that, basically you set the culture and then you design the systems, processes, et cetera, to reinforce it, which is a little bit different than how you and I have talked about culture. Yeah. So I, of course, pushed back on our behalf and said, we wonder about the systems and processes and practices actually creating the culture. What we came to in the aha for me was that in smaller companies, you probably do have that first mindset where you establish culture and then you put in place the processes and et cetera that reinforce it. But as the company gets bigger and you don't have the opportunity to establish culture, it is a lot about the practices and processes and systems that create culture as an outcome. So that shift that goes along with organization size was something that really struck me. So that was point one. That was the aha. Point two was the, I'm not sure I agree with that point. And that one was when we were talking about this concept that you and I have begun really discussing, which is the hollow out expert. So the idea that we're using AI to project confidence to complete work, et cetera, but there isn't necessarily a stable bedrock underneath it. And I asked Ron, how do we address that, particularly in the context of culture? And he said he thinks that it's up to the individual as they think about their career path and their manager. I actually don't agree. I think that it is a system issue that we are going to have to think about. We're going to have to figure out the governance around what our expectations are of how we use AI, when we use AI, how we expect people to retain their judgment and their critical thinking. And then there needs to be ways that we actually measure that. What about you?
For me, there were basically three big things. The first one is he knows a lot about culture. He's built culture in a lot of relationships, and I loved that about him. His point of defining what that culture is and then all the systems and processes should support that culture, whether the culture comes first or the systems and processes come first, I think it was a really good point, because what happens in a lot of organizations is we put the culture on the wall in the form of values, and then we do whatever the heck we want. And he was talking about how all of that needs to be aligned, which you and I completely agree with. We think systemic culture is the way to go. The second thing that he talked about, which I thought was really interesting, is we asked him the question, how do you know when your culture is about to blow up? And he gave some really good points that I'm not going to go over here, but listen for that, because it was fascinating to hear him talk about how he's seen it done before and how he's sort of recovered from that. And then the last thing is we asked him about AI's effect on culture, if culture was more important or less important than it has been in the past. Clearly, we think it's more important, and so does he. He talked about how AI is improving culture in some ways. He talked about democratizing information and transparency. He also talked about improving manager effectiveness because they have more tools and we're taking stupid work off their plate. He talked about personalized micro moment learning for the individual rather than for the entire group. But he also talked about some potential harms. He talked about the ability to do more surveillance and monitoring, which can be really scary. Over-reliance on AI. So this idea of the holodeck learner is something that he pulled out. The fact that we might lose our creativity and our ingenuity because we're relying too much on what AI says. So those were the points that stood out to me. This was a fantastic episode, as usual. If you like it, please follow Red Thread. And if you want to know more about the summit, I'm sure there's information included in the podcast. Talk to you later. Welcome to Workplace Stories, Ron.
Excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
We're super happy to have you here. We have known each other for a long time, but we reconnected last year at Summit for Red Thread's conference.
Yes, it's great to reconnect. I remember we were on stage in Orlando way back in the day as well, too, that we shared our time together.
That's fun. Right. You were at Lyft at that time.
Yes.
Yeah. I noticed that you also registered for Summit this year.
Yes, I'm excited for it. I mean, with everything going on in AI, I can't wait to talk to other HR data and other people to understand how they're implementing it, because there's so many different ways of doing it right and wrong. And just having that mind share that we had last year, I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. We had such a good group last year, and I think it's shaping up so far to have the same sort of like intellectual power in the room. So we're pretty excited about it. Today, we want to talk to you a little bit about culture. So you've been a CHRO for quite a while. Let's start with maybe an intro to you. Tell us about yourself and what you do for a living.
Perfect. So I'm an HR professional. I actually started my career a little differently. I was a CPA at KPMG for about 5 years, but always as a people-oriented person, and then shifted over into recruiting for a while. And then I got into HR. And what I love about HR is that really you're at the center of everything involved within a business, and people is like your number one asset and also your number one expense. And so really having a hand on how the organization grows and develops is really exciting for me. And I just love being an HR leader.
I actually love the way that you just described that. It's the biggest variable, but also the biggest expense. And I think we don't treat the people's structures in our organization the same way we treat other structures. And I think we're poorer for it.
100%. I really am hoping that HR becomes that strategic business partner, because it's needed, especially in this AI age that's upon us.
Yeah, for sure.
So, Ron, you have been in HR for a while, but I think people would really like to understand, particularly as it comes to culture, why should they listen to you? What do you know uniquely that you are able to impart to our audience?
I mean, I think because of my business background and then HR background, that I think culture is not just an HR thing. It's really a business impediment, or it could be an impediment, or it could be an accelerator. And it's so tied together that my experience in both areas, I think, will help drive some of that. I think also being in the key days of Lyft and Uber, how that you can really use culture, not only for our employees, but also for the drivers. I think that nuance is some things that other people don't have.
I love that answer. Well, maybe we start with something simple that isn't actually that simple. This is something I've had several conversations even this week trying to define this, but how would you define culture? What is culture?
I mean, for me, culture is like, it's a set of shared behaviors, decision rights, and also expectations to determine how a company actually executes its strategy when no one is watching. I like putting it when no one is watching, is because that's when the real magic happens or doesn't happen, right? And so, and to put it more specifically, especially in high growth environments, it's really about how do you make decisions? How do you reward incentives and reward behaviors? And how do you really operate your company and the workflows behind it? And so I think culture is all a part of that.
So just to clarify, you see defining culture as the thing you do first, and then all your systems and processes come off of that culture, the culture that you want to create.
Correct. And again, it's like an operating system. Culture is not just an HR thing. You can develop it like an operating system.
That actually ties in really nicely to a question I had, which is how much of culture is owned by HR? It's not just an HR thing, but how much of it is owned by HR, and how important is it?
Yeah, that's always a question that, everyone says, culture is owned by HR. I don't think it's owned by HR. I think in a lot of ways it's owned by everyone, but still leadership is the true owner of culture, and that HR designs the systems and how it scales and amplifies it. And so more specifically, I think like the founder or CEO is the person that helps define the values, behaviors, and what the company should be. And then like the executive leadership is what models that behaviors and how they make decisions and what are the right trade-offs they should have. And then like the managers, who I think are so crucial at everything, they reinforce what the culture is, how they hire, how they provide feedback, and what the expectations are for the team. And so what HR does is help design the system that amplifies the culture and how it scales. And so I think it's really important. And why it's important, I think I was talking about the operating mechanisms. I mean, so basically what HR has to define is like the hiring systems, right? Who gets hired? So have a really important process for interviewing design, for culture questions to make sure that it fits to what you're building within the company, and having like talent standards. What is the bar to get hired? I think the other key element that HR really has to put into operation is performance management. Do you reward people for ownership, for how they innovate, the speed? And that is really where you understand what is rewarded or not. I think also leadership development is so critical in all of this. How do you train your leaders? How do you develop a own leadership operating system? How feedback is. And when you scale, especially when you go from like 100 to thousands that I did at Lyft, if you don't have this defined, it's not going to be successful. And then this ties into how you design your org. Like, what's the span of control? Who makes the decisions? What does a team structure look like? I think those are all critical things that are important to how culture is ultimately graded. Also, I think the last piece of it is rituals and some of the communication pieces. I think, how do you develop your all hands? How do you recognize people? How do you have storytelling? All of this is important for what culture is like. And so if you get that right, I think that's how culture scales.
So a question, because you were, particularly, let's just take the Lyft example. You were in a situation where, yes, the founders could help influence it or set the direction. But as you scaled, it sounds like these systemic things were almost maybe equally important as influencers of the culture. Like it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg question, right? Do we start with defining the culture and then we build the processes around it, which you can probably do in a young company. But in a bigger company, is it the processes and the practices and the systems that then create the culture?
I think it's both, but I think in the larger companies, it is really the processes that help develop the culture and what you stand for. Because if you have a great culture, it can be a force multiplier. And if you're a larger company, sometimes it's too hard to react in real time. You should always be operating like a startup, and especially in AI today, that's the way you need to do it. But I think from a culture standpoint, you really have to have those processes so that you can develop the right core business outcomes, because culture is meaningless unless it drives the right business outcomes. And to me, there's about 5 key business outcomes. One is, are you hiring the best people? And are you hopefully reducing attrition? So you hire the best people and you keep the best people. And then how do you make decisions? Even in like large companies, you really have to move faster in this day and age. Otherwise, you're going to have bureaucracy, and then some new players might start up and impact how your culture is and how your operating rhythms are. And so, like I said, about the retention of top performers is so crucial. And if you have a culture that talks about growth, that talks about rewarding performance, that talks about how you make decisions, people are really beholden to that and really enjoy being a part of it. And then having that consistency amongst leadership, I think, is really important. Again, in my opinion, culture really is that systematic reinforcement of culture. It's not just values on a wall or culture statements. Those are pretty meaningless. Those were old school. And now it's really about this system. So hopefully that answers your question.
This is one of the reasons that we love you, Ron, because we think in terms of culture as a system as well. But I'm super curious about something you said earlier. You said everyone owns culture and it should come from the leadership. We have seen very few organizations where that's actually true. And I'm also curious, like, if HR doesn't own culture, HR owns most of the people systems that build culture. But I agree with you, they don't own sort of culture. But in an organization, somebody's got to be in charge of it, or it falls by the wayside and things get a little bit wonky. So I'm wondering, like, what are your thoughts on that? Who has ultimate responsibility for it, and who's the executor? Show me a RACI for culture, basically.
I still think it has to be the CEO that is the one who defines it. HR can be a part of that process, but ultimately that founder, it's their company. They need to understand, what do they want the way of working to happen. Now, if they want to see that to the HR person, that's perfectly fine, but it still has to be a collaboration between the two. Because a lot of time when everyone says you own, HR owns culture, because we're the ones that are probably talking about values in meetings. Like in the onboarding, we'll talk about it. And then, we have the tools that show what we reward and what we don't reward. So a lot of times HR is just the de facto person that does it. So everyone thinks it's HR, the one that's controlling it and developing it. When on the flip side, basically in those types of companies, and again, I don't want to be a generalist, but in those types of companies, you really don't have a defined culture that's tying to your business outcomes. Culture is more just like, oh, it makes people feel good, or it's what's in the current moment, how's the political situation, all of those types of things. I think what's really important, though, if you really truly define how you hire, how you retain, how do you make decisions, how do you scale operations, that's going to lead to your business growing, and people being happy is when business wins. People are not happy if business do not win or if they're not in the right environment.
So I kind of a follow-up. This was an observation. I had a conversation earlier this week with a fairly senior person. He's done the CLO job in several organizations. And right now he finds himself outside of HR. He's not in HR. He took a job in another part of the organization. And it was fascinating to talk to him. So I asked him, what is one of your takeaways from this? And he's like, how little the rest of the organization thinks about HR. Yeah. And I was like, yep, that's true. Or how little and it took me back to my early days at Ford Motor Company, where I remember seeing a competency model and thinking, oh, somebody created that. That's cool. You know what I mean? Not thinking that like, I'm not in it. It's just, it's tangential to the work that I'm trying to get done. And it kind of feels like the way that you're talking about culture is sort of the obvious part of the systems and processes should execute on that culture. It shouldn't be like HR sort of came down with this or leadership came down with this. It should be invisible to the way that we work and the decisions that we make.
100%. I totally agree with that. But, a lot of times, especially people who have known HR for a while, they always think of it, oh, the HR person is here. Let me watch my language, or let me, I don't even get that now sometimes in my company with certain people. And it's like, I'm not micromanaging you, or I'm not monitoring you. I'm not going to say, oh, you can't say that. But the traditional definition of what HR used to be is so not anymore. And unfortunately, I think if those types of individuals might not be the right people to help implement AI, and because I think AI is going to change how HR is going to be as well too, and how people manage and so forth. And so the only thing I could say about that is that I would not want to be in a company that thinks of HR from that perspective, because they're not thinking of the true value that myself and the team can actually produce. Because I think we can do so much more to help accelerate things. And the companies that I'm at, I think most of the CEOs would say that I was more than a traditional HR person. I was trying to help solve business problems outside of HR. And I think every function should be the business first and their function second. So I should be important to how the business of Truckstop grows versus just how HR is in Truckstop. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, it does help. I keep on coming back to, though, from a process engineering standpoint, which is where my brain got trained, who is in charge of making sure that those decisions align to the culture that you want? You know what I mean? How do you make sure that your senior leadership is aware enough about this and understands well enough what we're trying to do and what our culture is, that we're making decisions based on that? And I mean, you've done it in small organizations and you've done it in bigger organizations. Does it change based on that?
I think the definitions change over time as you scale a business. So what the culture is like and what it means in the early days is maybe different from when you're a 2,000 person company and your revenues in the billions of dollars. But so to answer your question, I mean, I think HR owns the mechanism and is the most important person or team to help inform all of the leaders, and the leaders have to understand it, accept it, and role model it. Okay. So it's not coming from them. But so I would say HR is the responsible person to help define, to help make it concrete and make it scalable and operational. And then the leaders are the ones that have to model it, because if HR models it and the leaders don't model it, then it's really hard to scale from that perspective. You need all the leaders to be aligned with that. Otherwise, your culture is probably not a healthy or consistent culture either.
So Ron, you said something that I'd love to dig into a little bit more. And that was that your last 100 hires are your culture. So what's that mean? And is it that you are hiring those folks into the culture you want, or that they influence it? Can you just help me understand that a bit more?
Sure. It's a combination. I mean, so when you're scaling so fast and you're bringing in a lot of individuals, you're bringing in people who have a culture and who have a playbook from other companies, right? So when you're hiring in mass, like we were at Lyft, you had to be very careful that from day one, you needed to talk about what the Lyft culture was, because it really does change if you allow those individuals to then seep through the rest of the organization. So the way that I say about it is that, like, your core principles are the same, but the way you define it might be a little bit different. So for instance, if you really want to move fast and break things, You can do that when your company is small, that it doesn't really impact the business. But if you do something that you're careless and it breaks something and it's a one-way door, you don't want to move that fast. You want to be more thoughtful about it. So the way that I think about it is you have to really explain the core and then define it as the stages of your growth changes. So understanding that nuance is really important. It's really the extension of how the values and the culture play out through the different life cycles of the company. That's what I was saying about 100. Like that's a number where if you bring in that amount of people, like I said, they're from all different backgrounds, all different experiences, that if you are not very prescriptive and intentional about integrating them in fully, then that's how your culture goes sideways.
Okay, interesting. And maybe you touched on this and I didn't quite catch it, but as you think about those 100 folks who are coming in, have you found a best way to kind of communicate that core of the culture? And like how do you make sure that they get that?
I think what we try to do is say, here are our principles of how we're using culture to tie to the business outcomes and really go through it. So like the hiring bar, here's what the hiring bar means. This is the definition of what we're looking for, the types of attributes that we have. From a decision-making standpoint, this is how we want to make decisions and in these situations. So in the onboarding process, and then maybe even deeper into like manager processes, really go through and talk about and give them scenarios so that they can play out what that looks like. So it's really a deep onboarding and definitions of how this ties to the business.
One of the questions I've always had, this is another off-script question, but while we're talking about hiring, one of the questions that I've always had about hiring for culture is how do you make sure that you get diverse thought as you do that? You know what I mean?
Correct. Yeah. I think so. If you have values that are core to what you do, there's usually a bunch of questions that you can ask about that and go deeper into see how their experiences are. Again, it's not foolproof in terms of, being discriminative, but I think it really is very key. So I'll give you an example. So especially with the Lyft and Uber situation, when we were in direct competition to hire someone into the company that were talking to both organizations, the people who chose us were usually about 60. It was back in the day, it was like 60 to 65%. And the reason they chose us in those questions was how we treated others, how we made decisions. It was not about your background as much, but how you operate and how. So one of the things we had, we wanted no assholes. We wanted people to really be themselves, challenge each other, but do it in a very nice way and not a very unprofessional way or condescending way and things of that nature. And so that's what we tried to test for based off of the experience. And like I said, people who joined us would love that and we would want that. And people who didn't would go to Uber or to another type of organization that has a different philosophy.
Interesting. Okay. Talk to me about how you measure culture, Ron.
That's a very interesting perspective. It's really challenging, but it's so important to think about, right? And so I think that the way you do it, first of all, you have to define what the behaviors and what the operating principles are, right? So for instance, if you say you want decision speed, so basically what you need is you need a team that understands to make decisions, but then also have an owner for it and someone who's accountable for it. So you really have to define these behaviors first up front before you can measure it. Then, when you're thinking about measuring, there's usually a bunch of different areas to focus on. One is potentially like behaviors. And so from a behavior standpoint, like how are you operating? I think when we talked about those principles, which are the hiring magnets, the decision speed and all of that, so are you behaving in the way that you're aligning to what we as a company really want to do? So that nuance is making sure that you're performing in the right area and the right behavior. And so those are kind of like the leading ones. And then once you have that, then you have to also think about what are your other signals that you have from feedback loops and so forth. So do you understand the company priorities? And do you understand the approaches that you want to take? And then that also thinks about what are the outcome metrics that you have as well too. So are you being productive? Are you hitting your goals? Are you keeping your top performers? Are you developing product velocity? What does your revenue per head look like? So I think all of those comes together And that directs it to what the strategy of the organization is. And so if you have that, that's the way I have seen it work best. However, it's still in early stages. A lot of people don't understand how to measure it. What do you think about that? Would you challenge any of those areas?
I mean, that's why I asked you. I'm not sure. I had a mentor at the University of Michigan. I worked for him for a little bit, and he said that culture can be boiled down to one sentence. It's how do you want to be known on the outside of your organization? And then everything that you do sort of ties into that thing. You know what I mean? I think you're right, getting down to the behaviors. The part where my brain kind of goes, I don't know, is behaviors are really hard to measure. Take it from the learning person. It's hard to measure behaviors and behavior change. And so what are the KPIs that you look at to say, yeah, they're changing their behavior? And then how do you tie that clear back to, yeah, we have the right culture that is creating the right behaviors that is helping us understand how we're known on the outside. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, the outcome metrics. So how productive are the teams? How do you keep the right people? Are you attracting the right people? Oh, is the revenue per head increasing, meaning that you have more efficiency and you're doing the right thing? So you try to look at the business goals and then layer back into the interview process or the process of how you develop performance. All those things are important. And so, again, it's not easy to do, and you're not going to have all the data at your fingertips, but I think you try to utilize the best you can to have some prediction. Because the one thing is, you always want to be proactive, because if you're not proactive, when all these people, if your best people are leaving or there's a lot of uncertainty in the business, then it's too late at that point. So you want to at least try these things, and these is what I have seen to be most effective.
If you're a senior people leader, you know the hard part isn't finding ideas. It's deciding which ones are worth acting on. That's why Red Thread created Summit 2026. It's not a conference, it's a small, invitation-only working retreat. On June 23rd, senior HR leaders will gather in Snowbird, Utah for 3 days of guided, peer-driven work grounded in research. No keynotes, no vendor pitches, no passive audiences. Leaders will leave having strengthened the people strategies they've been grappling with for years, with clearer direction on what to change, what to stop, and what to double down on. If you want to be part of that conversation, learn more and request an invitation over at redthreadresearch.com.
So can I give you a for instance or a what if? So let's just take the tech industry, for example. Apple has a decidedly different culture than Amazon does. They probably have the same KPIs. They're probably trying to attract roughly the same skill set. How do you sort of distinguish hiring for culture or developing the right behaviors for those cultures, given that the cultures are very, very different, but the KPIs and sort of what you would measure, what you talked about measuring, is roughly the same?
Yes, the outcome measures are the same. However, the operations, the things that you put into it that helps develop the outcome measures are different. So like Apple or Amazon, right? That frugality is one of the key things that they're looking at, right? We're not looking at frugality in order to help drive some of the decisions and other things. We're looking at, how do we define decision speed? How do we define collaboration? Are people working together across the functions in a way that you're hitting all your deadlines to roll out a product or to do a new operations workflow? So it's how you define that culture of systems for you versus the other company. Outcome metrics are probably the same, but it's the way you work and how you work and how you get there.
Okay. So sorry, Stacia, that ties back to like why it's so important to describe them up front. We are going to be this and do this, and these are the outcome metrics we want. And therefore, how do we tweak these things that we're going to do to make sure that we're being and doing it the way that we want to? Okay.
So I want to push on this idea around measuring the behaviors because, and Denny's heard me say this before, but one of the, I think, greatest untapped sources of data that looks at behaviors is recognition data, right? So what do people get recognized for by their colleagues, by their peers, et cetera, et cetera. And so I wonder if kind of, particularly as these cultures or these organizations and all of us are moving so much faster, if there are other data sources that we should be considering to understand what culture, what is really happening, what behaviors are actually happening in the organization, and if they're the ones that we want to be happening.
Well, I think some of the things you said is like for ourselves right now, speed to make decisions, speed to put out products, along with decision qualities. Like, are you moving fast, like in two-way doors? But do you have the nuance enough that you have to slow down if it's a one-way door and you can't come back from that? And then also, what is the risk tolerance that you have in terms of all of these things? So you have to connect culture to that. And so if you reward that type of behavior that is aligned to where you want to go, that's reinforcing, how to operate within the organization. Now, if you are inconsistent on that, where one part of the organization rewards that decision making fast and doesn't care about the quality of it, that's when things go upside down. And going back to what Danny said earlier, is that HR is kind of the gatekeeper or the referee on this, and measuring all of this on the back end so that we can help correct anything that's happening midstream versus waiting until it's a full-blown issue and you're really not performing in the way that you need to perform. So I still think it's defining what you reward, how you reward it, and the behaviors that you want, and then tying those to those outcome measures. That I think is the only way that I can see how to do that.
All right. So you've also seen cultures break down, Ron, as well, I'm sure. It seems to be happening a fair amount these days because of decisions organizations are making. What do you think it looks like before it becomes a full-blown crisis?
Yeah, no, it's it's easy for culture to break down. And I think it happens like in a few stages, right? I mean, I think there's like early warning signs where there's like subtle friction that happens, and things like decisions that will take longer to make, or high performers are like grumbling about certain things, and you hear comments that it's not as great of a environment that it used to be. So that's like the first stage that I've seen it happen before. And then usually the next stage is more like it's more about the behavioral side of things. I keep going back to behavioral, but I think that's really important. It's like you have managers interpret things differently than what your culture is talking about. The teams operate with their own standards. It's like then there's political behavior that becomes more and more noisy. And when you're hiring people, it's more like, I just need a body here. I don't care about our principles about how to hire. And so that's when you see where, like people will say, well, depends on what team you are is the experience that you're going to have, or depends on the politics of the organization. And that's when a lot of the culture is centered in a local manager versus the whole theme of that system that you had. It breaks down from that perspective. And then ultimately, that third type of area is where you lose trust, where culture is so bad that all your high performers are leaving. You have bureaucracy where it's all about red tape and CYA and not about being innovative and creative and hitting the goals, and that you have all this internal politics. So your leadership, a lot of times you're going to have negative views on the leaders and how they model this behavior, because if it's breaking down within the organization, it usually starts from the top. And so the key though, so if I had to pick one thing that gives you insight into it, it's about your decision speed and ownership. If you get slower and no one wants accountability, and you have so many individuals that are involved in projects, but there's no one choke to throat, so to speak, you can see the culture is really breaking down from that perspective. That's how I think about it and how I've seen it before as well.
Can you come back from that?
You can't, but you can't come back from that. Again, you have to reintroduce the whole. And what I mean by the whole is just saying, hey, look, if I was the CEO or even any of the exec teams, I would have a talk with each of your own orgs and say, look, our company is not in a great place right now. We could see it in how we operate. Look, we still have a great opportunity to win. We still have a great opportunity to turn this around. We have to go back to our roots and our principles, and let's deconstruct what has happened over the last few months. And let's have each leader break it down with their organization to build it back up. I think that's the way of doing it. I've tried doing that in companies before, and it has been pretty successful, but everyone has to be on the same page, and every leader has to do the work. So everyone needs to be accountable, and I can't force all the other leaders to be the same way that I am.
Yeah. It also sounds like there probably needs to be a fair amount of transparency about what's going on and what needs to change and all the things.
Very true.
Interesting. Okay. Well, on that happy note, let's jump into lightning round. So Ron, what's your DJ name?
DJ name. I think it's Bougie Ron.
I feel like that needs a little tiny bit of explanation.
A lot of people call me like bougie, kind of very particular about certain things and
Okay.
their way like food and other types of things that they joke with me. He's too bougie.
Okay, that's awesome.
Hilarious. Okay, well, keeping the music theme for bougie Ron DJ, what songs have you completely memorized?
Oh, completely memorized. Some of the Bon Jovi songs from the 1980s, I've memorized a few of them, Living on a Prayer being one. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to sing. I'm not going to sing, though. I'm a horrible singer. Everyone says I should not sing.
Oh, I was going to say that at Summit this year, we should do a Living on a Prayer karaoke because
we totally
know
should.
all the words.
Oh, that would be so much fun. Oh, my God.
How fun would
Maybe
that
we
be?
should introduce karaoke to like the opening night. I wonder if we get people drunk enough to do that. Okay, we'll try it. We'll take that into consideration. That might be really fun. Okay, final one. If you could implement a rule in your office or for your organization for one day, what would it be?
No meeting day.
Ooh, I like that
We
one.
have that.
We do have that.
You have that?
We do. Fridays are no meeting days.
I haven't. Well, I learned that at Meta when I was there, and I've tried doing that at other companies, and it doesn't really work.
It's hard.
It really is
Yeah.
hard.
I say that we have no meeting day, but Stacia and I both have 3 meetings tomorrow. So, but no external meetings. So maybe that's it. I don't know.
It used to be.
Yeah,
The run up to Summit is a little intense.
it's hard.
So.
Yeah.
That's all.
All
Okay.
right, shall we jump back in?
Let's jump back in. Okay. So we alluded to the fact that culture is being hit from all kinds of directions right now, Ron, and a lot of organizations aren't dealing with it very well. When you look across organizations, maybe not just in your own, but across organizations, what worries you the most about that?
There's a lot of juxtapositions to some of this stuff. I think I keep going back to like speed. Like speed is so important versus like complexity. So I think if you're trying to move really fast, but then you involve more stakeholders that need to weigh in on it, you have more distributed teams, or there's like more risk oversight. That is when complexity really slows down ownership and innovation. And so there's a tension between that I think you have to right size at some point. I think the other thing right now is for cultures, the manager capabilities. I think a lot of people still promote managers because they're great ICs, but they don't really take advantage of the tools and other things to really help guide their employees. So you have a inconsistent like employee experience for individuals who are in different managers. I think that the way they run a team could not provide the right feedback, or they don't have the right touch points and accountability. So again, if it's solely manager localized dependent and they're not bought into the culture system, that's part of a big issue that I see a lot as well too. And then, in distributed work and connection, I mean, a lot of people think that in-person collaboration is the best way to do things. A lot of times people think that you can, just leave it to be decentralized and have like informal mentorships and so forth. And I don't think one way is always better than the other, but I think the key is you have to clearly communicate what you want, and the leadership has to adopt to it. And I see that going wrong in so many different ways because people have so many different opinions through this. So I think the best way of doing or addressing this is having some type of consistent clarity of communication and redefining and re-talking about all of the things that we've talked about throughout this podcast about ownership, decision rights, what leadership looks like, all of those types of things, I think is the best way of doing it. And so clarity is the word that I would say that is so important to this.
Which is kind of scary because I'm not sure even senior leadership has clarity on direction or where we're going or what we're doing, and things are changing so fast. And
I know.
How do you fight that? I mean, how do you maintain a culture in the situation that we're in right now?
From a political lens or AI lens or what lens?
From all the lens. Like it's so chaotic out there right now. Just how do you, if nobody knows where we're going, and we used to have 5-year plans, but now we have 5-week plans. Like, how do you maintain a culture in that?
Yeah, I think you have to go to the principles that got you here, right? And how you're operating and understanding that you might not know what's happening, but you have to, the one thing that is so important for everyone is to be curious and to try new things. A lot of people fall back when they don't know what's happening to their old ways of working, and the way that you have to work and the way that you have to bring yourself to show up every day is different. And the speed that AI is growing and developing and the speed that we're adapting is so different. AI is so far ahead than the human reaction to it. And so having that curiosity is going to be so crucial to this. And I think if, as a leader, if you don't have that curiosity and you don't have that agility to move fast, it's not going to work. And you're going to have to find better leaders to help institute this change.
I want to return to something that you just touched on very briefly a moment ago, and that was the whole return to office thing. And we've seen return to office be really kind of like this massive proxy battle, if you will. And so, in your opinion, what does how a company handles return to office actually reveal about who they are?
Yeah. I think, return to office has so many different layers to it. I think the number one signal is about trust that people are going to deliver outcomes. And so what I mean by that, if you focus on the outcomes of an organization, you focus on results, you focus on accountability, I think you're going to be more comfortable being in a remote environment. But if you're more focused on, do you see people in the office? Do you have supervision, or do you have that emphasis on having daily, stand-ups in person versus on a screen and so forth? I think that's going to show that you're more of an in-office type of requirement. And it's about presence and controlling versus the trust and the outcomes. I think that's something that is pretty easy to see. I think the other thing is, we talked about clarity and decision-making. I mean, I think you have to have clear decisions. You have to have clear connections to what that is, and policies, and how you talk about decision-making in a remote environment versus in person. The weaker organizations, what that shows is that you don't have the same type of policies for every person, right? So like some stars might be able to do something that others cannot do. And you struggle to explain why all of these things are really happening. So it's more about the clarity and conviction, and how you roll things out is really important. And then the same thing with the collaboration piece. I mean, I think it's all over the map, but I think the bigger misstatements are, if you have these values and you have the culture, and that you operate differently from what those values are, is really going to tell you, do you really want to be remote or do you not want to be remote? And so I think the answer is you have to pick a side and be very clear, concise, why you want a remote environment or why you want an in-person environment, and then really tie that to how you're going to do business. And I think that's, a lot of people just are on both sides of the fence a lot of times, and there's no connection between what the leaders want and what the mass wants. It's a tough place to be. It definitely is a tough place to be. I think that the hybrid seems to be the one that works the most right now. But I think people, as things have been removed from the last year and a half or so, people are moving more to that hybrid or even more remote type of scenario, being focused on outcomes versus how you do it.
Yeah. I mean, my question, so one of my areas of specialty is performance management. And we struggle understanding what the outcomes are that we want to measure people on, let alone some of these other outcomes. And so that question about trust in people to deliver outcomes, well, like, you might have the first part, you might have the trust, but if no one knows what the outcomes are, then how are you going to even know if you're there?
Well, that's why I think it's so key that you should have company goals, and you have to cascade them down in whatever form you can be. You can do SMART goals or OKRs or what have you, but you have, here are the top 3 goals for the company. And then how you cascade them down to each of the different functions to that manager director level, but then how do you tie it individually to all the people within your organization? I think that is the most important thing to do, so people know what they're working on and how it connects up. It's not easy to do, but I think it's critical to do. And just like you were saying, if you don't know what the outcome is, you could be doing something that you think is right, but it doesn't move the needle on what the key goals are. And so you might not get rewarded for all of the good work you did because it was not tied to the right things. And so I think that clarity all up and down the organization is important. I've seen it go bad. I've seen it gone well. And sometimes even the same technique might have different results depending on the people that is involved with implementing this.
I'm starting to see a theme. Go back to who you want to be and how you want to do the work, and then align everything to it.
100%.
Yeah.
Yep. And make sure it's aligned to your business goals.
So Ron, we know that AI is seems to be touching everything. In fact, one of our mega trends is AI is the air we breathe, meaning that, it's just ubiquitous at this point. And we've been talking about culture in some ways, almost like it doesn't intersect with AI, but we know it. We talked about the tools and the systems impacting culture, and so we know that it does. So a couple of questions for you. How do you see AI as a tool that can strengthen culture? And what do you see as potentially the ways that it can undermine or harm culture?
Yeah, I think strengthening culture, it's going to bring a lot of transparency and a lot of information to everyone's fingertips. I think it can summarize, do research, all of those types of things like in quick seconds that people wouldn't have access to. So I think that's going to help democratize all of that. I think manager effectiveness also too, because I think in managers, you're using AI, it can help them go through a tough conversation, how to prep for it. How do you provide, transparency to your team? How can you utilize that so that you don't have to work on your administrative stuff, but then can focus more on the people? So I think AI will help that. Obviously, reducing a lot of the administration burden so you can be more creative and innovative. I think that's there. I think even in the L&D space, how that's going to help culture is that it's going to be very personalized learning. I think you can access whatever you want to learn when you want to learn it. It's not going to be in big, large classrooms or sessions. It's going to be micro moments to individuals so you can develop new skills or help create that path of continuous learning for you. I think all of those are positives. I think from a negative standpoint, if companies are using AI from like a surveillance or monitoring standpoint, that's not going to go well. And if they look at how many keyboards you type or, all those types of things, that again, that's a trust issue and that's going to be very harmful. I think the other thing is too, a lot of times people think that AI is the end all be all that can do everything. But if you don't have that human judgment or the context or the creativity that is needed, that if you just rely on those decisions from an AI standpoint, that's going to really hurt your culture. And so the way that I think about it is like AI is a leadership choice. It's going to be like, if you're working side by side, it's going to augment people, but it's not going to replace that creativity and that judgment of the person. And if you keep that judgment along with all the good things AI is doing, that's where it becomes powerful. And it will expand the human's capacity versus diminishing some of the other things that could be a part of it. So the learning piece, the transparency piece, and the productivity piece are great things, but you have to keep that human element as a part of it, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's, one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is this question of judgment and critical thinking in the context of this. We mentioned a little bit, or I have talked a little bit earlier today, maybe not here, but I've talked a little bit earlier today about this concept of the hollowed out expert. So, this idea that somebody looks really good in terms of their outputs because they've used the AI to help them. And no one's against the AI being used to help them. But when push comes to shove and you really need to understand and dig in, they don't have that same level, that bedrock of expertise that they did historically. And this is how it ties back into culture, is when we're thinking about how we're developing people and teaching them to use AI, and we're thinking about what are the norms and expectations with regards to AI, how do we make sure that we're making sure they still have enough depth and judgment and critical thinking so that we don't have just organizations of hollowed out experts?
That's a great way to put it. I was actually talking at the conference I'm at today, but we were talking about the exact same thing. So you think about it for like our kids or the new generation in college and so forth, they're not going to have the expertise or the experience to think creatively how to handle something. So if AI makes it good and it's right, it's great. But if it doesn't work, they're not going to have the tools or instruments in order to figure it out. And so I really think it's two ways. I think you have to own your own career. So you have to still, even though you're using AI, I think you have to have the curiosity to understand the why behind how these things happen and develop a career path or learning moments for you. I think that is on the person, but I also think it's on the manager as well too. As the manager starts putting this work out that is so AI focused, you have to give them other challenges and projects so they can have that critical thinking and that business acumen in order to develop. I don't think we have it figured out. At least I don't have it figured out yet, but I think that's going to be a crucial question that a lot of people are going to be talking about. And so those are the couple of ways I can think about, but I think that's going to be a big issue over the next year or so.
Agreed. All right, we're coming up on time. So one more question about AI, and then we'll jump to the conclusion.
Okay.
I've been having a lot of conversations lately with leaders of organizations that see culture as an increasingly important thing. So it hasn't been getting a lot of love for the last 5 years or so. But with AI coming in, they see it as a critical thing. And so a lot of the L&D leaders, for example, that I'm talking to are doubling down on in-person learning.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And a lot of the leadership people that I'm talking to are doubling down on making sure that the managers have the skills that they need. And so these, when I ask people what skills do you think you're going to need in the future, a lot of times they're the human skills and the things that you get from interacting with people, not the use of AI. And so I'm curious on your take with respect to that. Do you think culture is more important than it has been in the past? And how do we double down on it?
I think culture in this AI world is really important because those philosophies of how you work, how you create, support for the business and so forth it's a human thing. It's not an AI thing, in my opinion. I do think though, trainings, having the career paths and the roadmap are still going to be very important. And I think managers will still be the center of this. I know a lot of times people are saying that the manager span of control is going to accelerate significantly. I don't fully agree with that because I think in this new world, the managers are going to be managing AI agents plus people. So I think that's going to be a lot. And so I think the manager training is very, very critical. I just don't think it's going to be in that big classroom setting. I think it's going to be tailored to what their unique function is and what they're trying to learn. And everyone might have different needs or different appetites for what they want to learn. So I think it's going to be more tailored to them at any time versus taking time out for 10 people to come together. That's just my opinion. That's what I think. So why do you feel like the community that you've been talking to feels like it's going to be more in person and less, micro learning moments to the individuals?
I think some of it might be, this is the skeptic in me. I think some of it might be the knee-jerk reaction to, oh my gosh, digital everything. I just want to talk to a human. Other people also want to talk to humans. So I think part of it is that we are losing connection when we decide to talk to Claude versus when we decide to talk to the person sitting next to us. You know what I mean? So I think part of it is that. I think the other part though is, at least from a development standpoint, there's big discussion going on right now about the things that you can learn from a machine versus the things that you need to learn from each other. And Summit is a really great example of that, right? Can you imagine doing the things that we did in Summit last year, not in the same room?
Oh, no.
Yeah. No. So I don't know that it's a doubling down on everybody gets in the room to learn all the things, but I do think that we're being a little bit more selective about the things that we learn on machines versus the things that we learn from each other and developing the skills that we should learn from each other and from each other.
That makes sense. That definitely makes sense.
Ron, this has been an amazing conversation, but unfortunately we're out of time. So we'd like to wrap with just a couple of questions. And the first one I'm super interested in, which is, what are you reading right now?
There's two things. There's one, the AI-driven leader, and I think Jeff Woods is the author of that. Have you heard about that? Read that? It's a really good book. Really good book. A new one though is called Reshuffle, it's Reshuffle about AI, about deconstructing in order to use the right workflow and the right agents and so forth. And it's by Sanjit Chaudhry. And it's really fascinating. And this person is very, very smart. And I started reading it, and it just really talks about the concepts of, when to use AI, how to use AI, all of those different things. And I think the audience would find it fascinating.
I just barely put them on my read list. So thanks for that. The final question we always ask everyone is, why do you do the work that you do?
I kind of said this at the open as well too, but to me, the building a company, being a part of a company from an HR perspective touches so many different things that makes or breaks a company in a lot of ways. I feel if you can develop an environment where people can do their best work that they've ever done, and then have the culture and the mechanisms in order to really hit those business goals, that's where the magic happens. And that's what makes it so special. I always remember my Lyft days too. It's like you were flying an airplane, building the engine as you go. I mean, it's scary, but it's fun. But there's just some type of connection that you have when you do all this. And I just love it. I'm just very passionate about it. And culture, I think, is so critical. And people don't think about culture as much as they used to. And they should even more now. It really should. So
thanks, Ron, for being with us.
No, I'm really excited. It was a great conversation and look forward to seeing you guys soon.
Yeah. Thank you, Ron.
Thanks for listening. If this podcast got you thinking differently about how work happens, that's what we're here for. We dig into these topics every week in our research and in the Red Thread community. The Red Thread community is a place where people, leaders, and practitioners come together to compare notes, share what's working, and maybe challenge those things that aren't working so well. You can join for free at redthreadresearch.com/membership. Or if you or your organization are ready to go deeper, take a look at our professional and our enterprise memberships. For professional tier, for listeners, you can use the promotional code STORIES, STORIES, for a 10% discount. And if you're a tech provider trying to make sense of this space, our tech consortium is where smart vendors are coming together to learn from each other and from the market. You'll find everything at redthreadresearch.com. I'm Danny Johnson. Thanks for listening and for caring about making work better.
Okay, that's a wrap for this episode of Workplace Stories. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to our podcast so that you can be the first to know about future episodes. For exclusive access to our research, insights, and a vibrant network of human capital leaders, consider joining the Red Thread Research community. Visit redthreadresearch.com to learn more and to take your workplace to the next level.